Welcome to the Heart of Dad podcast. Heart of Dad is a podcast for entrepreneurs who are passionate about their families and business and looking to find more clarity, more balance and more alignment in all areas of their life. Come and join the community at heartofdad.com or on Facebook at groups/Heart of Dad. This week on Heart of Dad, I'm delighted to be interviewing Jason Oates. Jason has been married for 20 years to Laura. They have 3 children, Luke 17, Rachel 15 and James 12. Jason's the co-owner of Fusion Contractors LLC, a general construction company with 14 years in business. He's also the creator and host of Whistle and a Clipboard Podcast, which he's been running for 5 years. And Jason's an active sport coach, having coached over 80 seasons from youth to college athletes, as well as being a personal performance coach. So today I'm really delighted to invite Jason Oates to the Heart of Dad podcast. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I live in the U.S., in North Carolina. People call it the Triangle. I call it Raleigh. But anyway, or people call it RDU because of the airport. But I'm a dad of 3. My oldest is 17 and a junior in high school. And my daughter is 15 and she's a sophomore in high school. And my youngest is 12 and he is a 7th grader. So, and I coach a lot of them in the sports that they do. And then I also own a construction company with my dad here in North Carolina. We travel about an hour plus from our location to do anywhere from residential additions and renovations to small business upfit, like commercial stuff. So that's just kind of a quick and dirty for me.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we know each other through coaching primarily, don't we? And I'll come into that in a little bit. But tell me about your construction business. How long has that been going with your dad?
My dad initially got licensed as a general contractor in 1980. From the time I was about 4 or 5, equipment I was babysitting for me in the summer. I went to work with my dad. So, and then we've been in official business for the last 14, 15 years here. So we got to go through the lovely recession, the mortgage crisis recession, and that was interesting to say the least, just trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And, and yeah, so we've always just kind of, I guess he started out as a framer. Then we did custom homes for a while, and then another recession hit. So we moved over to doing playgrounds and bleachers. So like at the fast food restaurants, we did a bunch of those little playgrounds to begin with. And then we started doing high school bleacher stands and moved to college bleacher stands, and then did professional stands like at NASCAR events and stuff. So that was interesting. Then we went back to construction, but I've always enjoyed building things, and I just really like the fact of being able to build something that you can go back to down the road, and it's still like something that you're proud of. So I've never built anything like cutting corners and that kind of stuff, and it's just kind of stuck with me with everything that I do. And so it's been that's nice. It's been really enjoyable, but then on the flip side of it, like more recently with the coaching stuff that we know each other from, like I started to see that, for me at least, like that's kind of the direction I want to go. I want to change it from coaching as my hobby and construction as my business to construction as my hobby and coaching as my business. So
an interesting flip, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But one thing that strikes me, Jason, is that you've been in business like 14 or 15 years with your dad, and and it's been in your blood from much longer. But right through that period, you were having your children. All three of them are born in that period when you've been a business owner. And I was just wondering what that was like for you, having your children while also trying to drive a business through all those difficult times with the recessions and in the good times as well.
Well, I'll tell you what, my kids are a release for me. Like I come home and we play and we goof around and we have a lot of fun. And even when they were little, my wife is she was a nurse in a hospital setting, and she since went back to school, and now she's a pediatric nurse practitioner. So she's in an office setting. We waited till at least our youngest was in his last year of preschool, / getting ready to start kindergarten, so it wasn't quite as crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But I've really enjoyed the ability. So like I was mentioning, I coach my kids too. So I've coached over 80 seasons of youth and of sport for the age between 4 and 24. So, and a lot of those seasons have been my own children. And, so, sometimes it was stressful with the fact of, just my whole thinking about what was going on and where we're going to get the next job and that kind of stuff. But at least my wife had a good job that, I won't say completely sustained us, but it definitely got us through. And if it wasn't for her work, who knows what would happen. But
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, that's kind of what it's been like. In my I'm laughing because like I've taken my kids. They haven't been as interested in construction except for the youngest one as I have. But like I was doing a upfit for a lady that was building a fragrance and soap store, and I let them paint the back room, but they were all only like 4 feet tall, was the tallest at the time. So I went into the room, and of course they painted as high as they could, but it was just like a wainscoting around, and it was the funniest thing. And my oldest son, it was in the evening when their mom was at work, but he had pushed the paintbrush too hard against the wall, and then as he pulled it up, he whacked himself in the forehead, so he had this big old spot of paint on his head. But it was so it's been times like that, and then other times like we went and I had another project where it was all demolition, and they used to be in year-round school, and so I was like, hey kids, y'all want to go earn a couple bucks and break some stuff? And they're like, yeah. So that was a fun memory of giving them sledgehammers and then just letting them break things and throw it in a dumpster. So
sounds a brilliant experience for kids. My son loves destroying things. Should have sent him your way.
Do it. we can always use an extra hand with them.
Consider it done. I was just listening to you there. I mean, I don't know that much about the construction industry other than being a client occasionally, and it seems to me like and I think you were alluding to this, it's kind of like a feast and famine.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be.
Yeah.
So like right now it's there's plenty of work out there. And it's also, I mean, it might be me too. I'm a little bit picky with the clients, and I'm a little bit picky with the way that I do things. And I'm not willing to lower the price when I get into a place where I'm not providing something that I want to go back and look at down the road. Right. So there's things cost less for a reason in construction, is because the materials are not as good. And when you get to that point, down the road, it's not going to be anything you want to go show anybody. So
so it comes back to bite you.
Yeah.
Well, how when you've been in the really, really busy times, and it sounds like now is a good time for you, like how do you balance things with your family life? And that's been one of the big topics of this podcast so far, how dads find a balance between their drive for work and their need to provide for their family, and along with their partners who may be contributing as well as yours is. But how do you do that?
That's a really interesting question, because I've always looked at, like, people are like, oh, I'm so busy. And then when you look at it, like, how busy really are people? And what I'm getting at is, what are all those things that you could cut out that are time wasters, like watching television, like honestly reading the newspaper, like I'll even throw in listening to radio, and I listen to a ton of podcasts, and they're all like educational and books and that kind of stuff. So it's one of those. It's like when if people would step back and actually look at what they're using their awake hours for, I think they'd realize that there's a whole lot of time there that you can use better. Like it's a matter of choice. Like in the evenings when you get home, do you want to watch television or do you want to interact with your children? Do you want to, if there's like, I have a podcast called Listen to Clipboard too, and in the evenings after I get home we tend to try to have a family dinner, so we're all sitting around the table, chatting or goofing or joking each other or whatever. But our conversations usually devolve pretty fast, and so we end up talking about things that most people wouldn't want to talk about at the dinner table. But then it's like after that, and we've had our time, then I'll go work on my podcast, or I'll go work on something else, unless one of the kids has a practice, and then we go to practice. And then, I think time management is a weird thing, but it's also kind of gets back to what the coaching stuff that you and I were looking at, and the way that the principles part of things of it really becomes a perception of how much time do you think you have, and then going back and looking at it and being like, how much time am I spending on things that, like, in a couple, like tomorrow, really aren't going to have made a difference for me, whether that be spending time with your kids, or spending that extra time on work, or taking a walk, or whatever it happens. So
yeah, it's a great.
It's probably not really answer your question, but
no, it has. Yeah, I think it's a really great point you're making, which is, this has come up from other people in different ways, I think, but you're the first to say it this way, which is really kind of the idea of balance is kind of it's a false idea in a way. You're talking about prioritization and choices that you can make to connect with your children in a way that just means, if you take a look at your day, then there's always time and space to do that.
Yeah, definitely. There's and it's just it's a choice. So yeah, and balance for me, like, you're never like, the other thing is, I'm not, as long as I take the opportunities that I have to interact and do that stuff with my kids, like, I'm not keeping a scale out and setting hours on each side of the scale, like this was business, this was family, that either. Like, I'm just trying to live each moment as the best I can, but also make those conscious choices of, if I want to spend more time with my kids, then turn the stupid TV off, or or that podcast that needs to go out tomorrow. It's really not that important, because my daughter wants to chat about, I don't know, like, whatever, right? So it's just, or I can have the discussion with her, and then I can stay up a little later and get the podcast done, or I can get up early in the morning and get done what I need to get done. So that's really where I'm.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I'm just wondering, like, have there been times, Jason, where that really kind of level-headed, proactive strategy has hit the rocks a bit? Where you've just had to prioritize one thing over the other because of either work schedules or demands or other things. Can you tell me about when that's happened in your life?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm just searching my brain for a specific moment, but so what, about 2 years ago, I had a gentleman on the podcast, and he ended up hiring me to help teach his style of leadership. So I started to go to Boston, which is an hour and a half flight from my house, every 2 to 3 weeks, and I'd spend like 4 or 5 days in Boston. with with this multinational construction company, teaching them his style of leadership. And so like that was a point where I had to step back from coaching their teams. Um, I wasn't around as much. I was only home on the weekends. So, it made it a little bit harder on my wife dealing with them. But then also, like my construction company wise, I had to be able to lead from afar, I guess would be the best way to put it. So, yeah, that was a time where I ended up choosing the work over the family. And then I guess just this year, I used to coach high school basketball as an assistant coach for a men's high school basketball team here in town, and had been doing that for the last 3 years. And this year, because my kids are so involved, like my oldest plays football, wrestles, and plays baseball. My daughter, she plays volleyball, basketball, and softball at school. And this year, the youngest, he ended up making the football team. And this is American football.
Yeah.
It's the ball that doesn't bounce well. and then he just made the basketball team too. So being able, I decided / was nudged in the direction of needing to not coach the high school team and be able to be present for my kids, just to go watch them. So, there's another kind of two decisions where one was work and then one was family. But, all in all, I mean, they both were the right decisions at the time. So, and I enjoyed both decisions. So.
Well, I think it's really fascinating listening to you talk about that and those kind of conscious decisions. It's kind of a theme out of today's podcast. But I'm wondering, has guilt played a part in decision making? You talked about being nudged in the direction of giving up your basketball team, for example.
I don't know that it's guilt. I mean, I know that's you got to go back to I don't know how much you talk about principles on this podcast, really, but that whole perception and just that understanding that if I'm guilty, that's really me telling myself a story about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then that feeling of guilt, it really only comes from me. It doesn't come from the decision. So I think, over time, I've learned to just make a decision and then go with it. And I was nudged. My wife was like, "You need to be watching your kids," and I'm like, "But I still get to go watch them. I still am coaching them, and I can do this other thing." But the flip side of that is those hours to be able to do other things aren't there. So, choosing not to coach, because high school basketball coaching that, it's every afternoon for 2 hours plus evenings and weekends. So games for evenings, and it's like a 3-hour, just from the time you leave the house, 3 or 4 hours, that's that. So, yeah, and I still talk with the high school kids that I coach, but on the same sense, it's been a great decision. So maybe if I was not having a good time with the decision I made, I might feel guilt about not doing it. Right. But I guess it's a waste of energy when you think about it. Like guilt's a waste of energy, emotion, because it doesn't do anything for you. So it make you feel bad. So why entertain it?
Right. So I mean, sport has come up a lot in what you've been sharing with us, and tell me about your relationship with sport and your family's relationship with sport, because it sounds like you're all very, very involved in it.
Oh yeah, I grew up here in the Triangle with UNC, NC State, and Duke, in terms of like it's a college area and the college sports dominate. So and then I played a lot of sports. I wrestled and played baseball in high school, and then I was actually a cheerleader in college and placed second and third and fifth and ninth in the presentation in a partner stunt competition. And had a scholarship to the University of Hawaii to do that, and then finished up my building construction degree at Virginia Tech, and actually coached college cheerleading for a couple of years. But I've, like, growing up watching sport, I always really enjoyed it, loved the competition, but just loved like that. There's times where things on the field, court, wherever it would happen that I did not. It's not that I necessarily expected them to or didn't expect them to. It's just like, you do something that was just, you went, oh wow, that was pretty cool. Didn't know that I could do that. And I've always wanted my kids to just be active, and I don't have any like thoughts that they are doing this to get a scholarship to school or to become a professional athlete or anything like that. Like, I just want them to be active, enjoy, and do something different. And over here in the U.S., there's a big craze to specialize your kids in something at an early age. And I've always been of the thought that, it's not going to be my choice if they end up doing it. And actually, from coaching a lot of kids, like, and this goes even outside of sport, but whatever, like, I may have some things that I would like my kids to do, but ultimately that's not them. That's me projecting like my desires and wants on my children, and letting them play these different sports and stuff. Like, we're giving them choices. Like, my youngest, he played soccer for a while, didn't like it. And then he played football for a while and didn't like it. And so, like, there's a trampoline in the backyard, and he was constantly out there, like, doing crazy stuff, like double front flips, double back flips with his buddy on it. And I'm like, hey, since you're not going to do either of these things this fall, why don't you do this gymnastics, flips and tricks, tumbling class? And he was like, cool. So he did that for a couple of years. I kind of let them, as long as they're doing something and it's different every quote unquote season, then I'm okay with that. And there comes a point in time where they can choose not to do it anymore, and then we look for something else, or just don't come home and sit around all day long.
Mm-hmm. That sounds a very healthy attitude, Jason. Just wanted to sort of move in a slightly different direction and talk about, if it's okay with you, talk about anger, because it's kind of been a really interesting topic that's come up in these podcasts, and it's one that isn't really spoken about so much. So every time I bring it up, my own relationship with anger as a dad, my own dad's relationship with anger, and then all the people who've been on so far, it's a bit of a persistent theme, that how dads manage their relationship with anger in life in general, but specifically in relation to their kids. And I just wondered, if you wanted to say a little bit about what kind of relationship you have with anger in relation to parenting.
That's an interesting question. Wow. And so there's been a change in arc with that for me. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, so, like, kind of early on, like, my parents in terms of just thinking about how they dealt with it, like, they're not, my mom will yell at me, but my dad was never a very angry person. And so I guess that's kind of where I first got my kind of thoughts around anger. And then my kids themselves, like, early on, I did spank them. And my kids would go like, Dad, we listen to you because you hit harder than Mom. And that's kind of a shitty thing, honestly. Mm-hmm. So, I was like, I gotta, so I just stopped spanking the kids. And I still get upset with them, right? Like, there are times when they just do stupid things or they don't do things. And so, yeah, I get angry with them. But then I also noticed that when I'm angry, that it usually makes a situation worse, whatever it happens to be. Like, it doesn't help. It doesn't get my kids to do what I want them to do any quicker. probably makes them take less, like it makes them take longer.
Yeah.
So I guess I've noticed that if I am angry, like they'll know it because I'll raise my voice and then kind of, you know, yell at them, and then I catch myself, and then I stop and I'm like, look, would you please do this and do it now? Because I really don't appreciate having to yell at you to get it done. So it'd be a lot easier for me and you if you would just do it, because you're gonna have to do it anyway.
Mhm.
So but yeah, so that's kind of been that change, and maybe the because I ran across the three principles about 5 years ago, and
Mhm.
I don't I was more looking for um performance stuff, like removing the fear of failure from my athletes and other people so that they could become the best version of themselves. But I never, like, I can see how it's changed the way I relate with my anger. Um, but it wasn't a reason that I went down that path.
No, but I can hear how you've had that sort of realization about where your feelings come from, and that acting out your anger doesn't actually support getting the thing done that you want to be done with other people.
Not at all.
No,
Not at all.
in
It
fact,
only, and it doesn't even make me feel better in the long run.
no.
I'm usually like, Dan, why did I, like, that was dumb. So that was an overreaction for them not putting away their clothes or whatever it
Yeah,
happens to be, right?
no, I love how you described it, and I think it's a pretty powerful message for other dads as well, around the futility of anger at times.
Yeah.
So the other question I had for you, Jason, was it's one I've been exploring with other dads, and it's kind of the topic of personal freedom within kind of marriage and having or relationship and having children. Because when you have kids, particularly, life changes significantly. And if you had three, I've just got one. You had three, and I don't know when did you have them in terms of your marriage? Was it early on, or had you been together for some time?
So my wife and I dated for 7 years before we got married,
Mm-hmm.
and that was mainly a function of uh, went to college for 6, and she went to college for 5. And then after school, we ended up moving in together, and it was 2 years after we moved in that we ended up having a kid. Now we'd only been married for a year,
Mm-hmm.
I think. But we did have a miscarriage too, which, if anybody's ever had one, it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
But after we actually had 2. We had one before my oldest son, and then one in between my daughter and my youngest son, because we took some time off from having babies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it was like we had thought we were gonna have 4 kids, and we stopped at 3 because I had my oldest son. We were at the ski resort, and I did the math on how much it was going to cost to have 4 kids going skiing, and I was like, this is ridiculous. So I called my wife and I was like, we're done at 3, and she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, we're done. We've got 2 boys and a daughter. We don't have a middle child. So anyway, that was, but it was I'll tell you, when you first started asking the question, one of the things that I always tell friends that are younger when they're thinking about having a kid, I was like, like, you're never going to be financially ready, so that's the worst excuse you can have about having or not having a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll be ready to have a kid when you're ready to be, like, you're ready for your name to be so and so's dad or so and so's mom.
Mm-hmm.
because it's a funny thing that my wife and I still joke about. Like, we'll be going, we'll see somebody go, hey, Gabe's mom, or hey, Gabe's dad, right? We can't remember their first name, but we know them by their children. So I think that really speaks to, for me at least, when you're ready to not care about your own, like, I have to go do this. I have to go do that. When you're ready to make it about another life, another individual, then then that's the time.
Yeah, I love that. It's a really powerful insight. I'm wondering, it's like, kind of, as your kids have got older, and I think you've been running your podcast, which I'll ask you to talk about at the end, but you've been running that successfully for quite a few years now, and you talked about it earlier when you hop off in the evening to get your podcast done, and that sounds like one of your passions, along with sport. How you've kind of created the space in your life for things that are important to you, alongside things that are important to you as a family.
I mean, that's kind of one of those things. It's like when I was getting my podcast up and running, I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm not like, I think people that glorify like the 4:30 in the morning thing is the dumbest stuff ever. So that's not what I'm saying here. Like, you have 24 hours in a day. It's how you how you choose to use the hours that you're going to be awake in. Like, I'm a big proponent of sleep, but it was one of those things. Like, I decided that, it's funny. So we go back to sport. The reason that I started the podcast was, football wise, I only have one kidney, so I wasn't allowed to play American football growing up. I actually even wasn't allowed to play soccer growing up because we were at the kidney doctor, and he had to leave the appointment to go remove a kidney from a kid that had taken a soccer ball right to the side.
Right.
So I was helping coach my oldest son's Pop Warner football team, and it's a volunteer position, but there's some things that go along with it. And I was at a point where I was like, man, I don't know enough, so I needed to go learn some more. And I was listening to podcasts, and I was like, man, I wonder if there's any coaching podcasts out there that I can, help, that I can learn from that way. And at the point in time, like, I searched and there weren't any. Now there's more. So I decided that I would create my own. And so, I would get up at 4:30 in the morning and there weren't these done for you sites like there are now. So you had to set up your hosting, and you had to, do your own website, and you had to do all these different things. And but yeah, so I just chose to get up early and do it then. And then one of the other things is I always cook breakfast for my kids. So like, I can get up, do that, and then when their alarms go off, then I can go and change, stop what I'm doing, and then go get them off to school, and then come back and do this, or go off to do my the job that pays money. So.
Yeah, I love that story you just shared, both of the determination to get up at 4:30, which is an hour that sucks, I know that personally, to get something done that you're passionate about. It's kind of really beautiful. And then I really picked up on this kind of idea that you cook breakfast for your kids, and is that like a ritual that you've had for a long time, Jason?
Yeah, since they were born. Like, it's one of those things. My dad cooked breakfast for me every morning, and it's also, it's another time to spend with the kids. Like, I designed the house that we live in. I changed the existing floor plan after we bought it, but the way that I designed the kitchen is it's so that I've got a cooktop, and I can stand behind the cooktop, and the kids can sit at the cooktop, or they can sit at the kitchen table, and we're looking at each other, right?
Love it.
So that there's that, again, if we interact, great. If we don't interact, great. But the ability is there. So we have some pretty fun conversations in the morning, and like, I'll cook them waffles, French toast, pancakes, any type of egg, or other things. But we usually alternate between like a protein morning and then like a starch morning. So, and just go through the day. And sometimes they get cereal, but not much. So
I'm just writing down a few notes as you speak, but I love that. I love that story, because it's just like food in my family growing up, but also now having a child. Like, it's a really important time of day to connect with the family over food. Kind of one time of day when we really know we're all going to come together and catch up about the day and with each other. So I love that you have that ritual that you inherited from your dad. I mean, that's just such a beautiful story.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, I guess it's intentional, um, but I mean, it's just, it's not, it wasn't something that from day one I set out, like, I'm gonna do this because my dad did it.
Right.
I just, right, it wasn't, so I don't want people to get like that thought, like they have to do it because I do it. I started doing it, and then it became um, something really enjoyable for
Mm.
me and my kids. And my wife gets to get up in the morning and not. She doesn't have to deal with breakfast. She can make the kids lunches, or they can make they actually make their own lunches. So
Mhm.
we had started them early on, like giving them responsibilities, and so yeah, so it's like she gets to interact with the kids too, and get her stuff ready and go off to work. And so it's just that time, if you can create spaces where you can. And when I say create, when you give yourself the opportunity to be able to connect individually, as a group, as a family, I think that's like the important part. It's not like forcing it, and not like, oh, we all have to sit down and have dinner, or we all have to sit down and have breakfast, but here's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And and here's an opportunity. And then, because I think when we try to force things, it never works well. Like going back to the anger thing, right? Trying to force them to
Yeah.
do things, it
Yeah.
doesn't ever pan out well.
Some great wisdom there. Just wondering, another question for you, Jason. Has there been a time when you've really struggled being a dad?
Early on with all the kids, honestly, like, my biggest fear for my kids was, you know, them dying, honestly, right? So it's like, and so like, my medical knowledge is a lot more than it used to be, but and I mean, but I do have, my wife she was a pediatric intensive care nurse, and then she was a peds ER nurse, and then she was an adult ER nurse, and now she's a pediatric nurse practitioner. So, like, any of those things, like, you hear about, like SIDS, or all those other, like, I don't know, um, things that could hurt your children that you hear about, like, I get to ask her the question, and
Hmm.
I have that medical knowledge person there. And so that's been, like, that's been the biggest help for me, in terms of um where my worries lie for my kids. um
So you
and
saying that you experienced some anxiety as a young dad, that,
I guess you could call it that.
mm,
I would just say, like, well, I mean, she would go off to work and I would be home with them, and
mm,
so I'm like, is there any reason to worry about this cold? And she's like,
yeah,
no. And it's like, or I'm like, so when do I actually need to worry if they have a fever? Like, what is a quote unquote fever? Like, that's the other part. Like, so
mm,
most parents think when your kid's temperature is 100 degrees, it's a fever. Well, not really. It's not like till it's like 102 that you got to worry about it. So, those are the things that I'm getting at. Like,
yeah, yeah.
or to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, right? Vaccinate. Um, those different things. Like,
Mm, mm.
that's been a real blessing for me, because that's the one place I worry about, is like, I want my children to outlive me, right? So, um, so yeah, so that's been, I guess, maybe the difficult part, and that was the early on part. Just, they're it's kind of funny, like, we look at babies like they're these fragile little things, but they're pretty much indestructible for the most part, right? They're super resilient. They're rubber. They bend in many ways that we can't anymore. Um, and if you think about it, like, as you watch, like, as you watch, like, with one of my kids, we took pictures, like, almost daily, from the time he was born until he was a year old, and just watching all those changes happen was really
Mm.
cool. But then you think about all the different things that they learn, and all the different things they do, and they go from just being the stationary thing to then you start rolling around, and then you start crawling. And depending upon your kid, some will walk or some will just run right away. So
Yeah.
it's but they're so resilient. So it's I guess that's maybe after. Here's the other way I like to explain it. With the first one, like they fall and everybody jumps over and you're like, are you okay? Are you all right? Is everything okay? The second one, you kind of look at them and you go, hey, you good down there? And the third one, you're like, oh, he's eating dirt. They'll be fine. So,
Yeah, that
so
rings very true with what others who are parents of more than said to me.
yeah. So anyway, that's maybe where I've had the difficulties.
Yeah.
And I guess, if you go back to sport too, there's a point in time where I had this idea of what a coach should be, and my kids they didn't want me to coach them anymore. And so because I was the in your face, loud, demanding kind of coach and blah blah blah. But when they said that they didn't want me to coach them anymore, like that kind of hit home. I was like, hold on, like if they're saying that, then I'm definitely doing something wrong. And that was kind of in the time before it was before I started the podcast. So this was 5, 6, probably like 7 years ago. And kind of that started that evolution of me then starting the podcast, because going, hey, if my kids don't want me to coach them, then I got to be doing something really bad. Or just like in my mind, I was like really bad, but it was just really wrong in terms of like I thought to myself, if I can't be this way to my children, how can I be this way to someone else's kid? So they were always the one that got coached the quote unquote hardest. And got to the point where they didn't enjoy that. So got to adjust and learn.
Yeah, I mean that's such a great story too, because it's kind of there are those profound moments of truth, isn't it, when your child speaks something to you that you don't see in yourself, and then you
Yep.
see it, and then it's kind of, oh geez, right, I really do need to pay attention to this now.
Yeah. And you know what, that kind of brings up another thing. It's a quote of one of the guys that I interviewed. His name's John Brubaker, but he said, you can't see the picture when you're trapped in the frame. And the more I hear that quote, the more I'm like, oh man, that is so true. Like you're inside of the frame, and having another set of eyes that's outside that can clue you in, that can tell you like things are. And sometimes it's your own kids and we just have to listen to it. But other times it's having somebody else outside that frame to help you along the path.
Brilliant. So another question I wanted to ask you, kind of on this theme, really, is like if there's anything you could change. I'm thinking about your eldest is getting to the age now where he's going to be off to college fairly soon, I guess. But is there anything you would change from your time as a dad?
I mean, my initial reaction is no, because if I had changed something early on, then I wouldn't be where I am. Like I feel like I have a really good relationship with my children. Like he's driving, he got into a fender bender the other day and he called me up. He's like, Dad, I just got in a little wreck. I'm like, okay. He's like, the other guy doesn't want to call the cops. I don't want to call the cops. We're just going to go to the ATM and I'm going to give him $300 and it's going to be done. I was like, if you're comfortable with that, I'm fine with that. So, like if he didn't have if we didn't have a good enough relationship where he could call me and know that I'm not going to just lose my crap over him getting in a wreck, then we wouldn't have had that experience. And so like, yeah, if I hadn't, I don't think there's anything I'd change because I wouldn't be in the spot I am where I am now. So
yeah, that's beautiful, and I think also a great testimony kind of to your relationship, that your son's not only kind of calls you up, but also has that kind of independence of mind to know how to solve the problem for himself, right?
Yeah, I was amazed. I was like, hey, that's cool. Like you do it. I like that. So, but I guess the one thing that I do want to say about that is I was willing, like I wouldn't go back and change anything because I changed it along the way.
Yeah, that's it.
Right. So that, I think that's kind of one, and I've noticed this, like I interviewed a guy, like I interviewed him at the beginning of the podcast 5 years ago, and I just interviewed him a couple of weeks ago again. And I thought it was really interesting how he had some of the exact same answers that he did 5 years ago. And I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Like, is it good that he hasn't changed? I mean, he's moved up in where he's worked and that kind of stuff. But on the same side, I'm like, what is he missing because he hasn't changed?
Mm. Yeah, it's a really interesting reflection. I mean, what I've heard from you throughout this podcast is you have a real capacity to kind of observe your world around you and how you're seeing it, and then to adapt. And you've had to adapt a lot, economically with your business, but also through your role as a sports coach and also as a dad. And that's a really powerful example. People can see that it is possible to keep evolving. In fact, we all do. And maybe your interviewee hadn't in the sports coaching world, but maybe he had in other ways. Who knows?
Yeah, it was one of those real interesting things. Like, because I stay in touch with a lot of the people that have been on the podcast, and it's just interesting to see how they've evolved and where they are now, and the ones, and I mean, like, what I've observed is the ones that have like, I don't know, self-reflected or had somebody outside the frame kind of being part of that, like, they've changed and gone to higher places and are doing bigger things and that kind of stuff. And the like, he's been the exception to that change rule, like not changing and still progressing in his career. But I don't know outside of work if he's progressed any. So.
Yeah, I mean, there are always outliers, but I think my experience kind of echoes yours, which is people who are most able to change and adapt tend to go the furthest, really. So, Jason, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it. How can we find out more about you if we want to?
Golly, so the podcast is called Whistle and a Clipboard. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, and other places. And it's really like, it's about an hour-long podcast where I interview coaches. The whole point of it was to interview professional coaches and thought leaders and that kind of type of person to help out youth coaches. But youth coaches are funny. They think they know it all, so they don't learn. So it's been a few high school, but college and professional coaches that mainly listen to the podcast. But it's a fun one if you're just kind of looking to improve. And I think at some point we're all, like, I ask people to define the word coach, and the two words I get most are leader and teacher. So, if you're a leader, it's good. If you're a teacher, it's good. That way. Let's see. If they want to email me, it's Jason H, the letter H, Oates, Oates @gmail. I answer all those, and those are probably the two best places. Whistle and a Clipboard has a website too, which is just that Whistle and a Clipboard all spelled out. I'm kind of slack on there, so I haven't updated it in a while. So you can find the old podcast, because iTunes only keeps the last 200. Or no, so now they're at 100, I think. But anyway, on iTunes. So if you want to look at some of the 250 plus coaches that I've interviewed, and I've done cricket, volleyball, basketball, softball, baseball, football. Did I say soccer? Swimming, lacrosse, gymnastics, strength and conditioning people, principals guys. So yeah, you name it. There's different authors out there. So
sounds like a really rich resource. I'll put the links down on the show notes as well.
Cool.
Yeah. So thanks again, Jason.
You're welcome, Matt. Thanks for having me on, and I hope that I've provided some value to your listeners today. And yeah, if they got questions or anything, I'm always available to chat if I'm awake on my side of the phone.
Indeed, yeah, that's great. Thank you.